Hi, I'm Clarence Waldron. Welcome back to Black Muse. Before we get started, I want to give a special thank you and acknowledgement to Howard Sandifer and Darlene Sandifer, the founders of the Chicago West Community Music Center, for coming up with this concept of a video podcast. They sort of said, let's reach out to our celebs and newsmakers. Let's reach out and have lively conversations. So with that in mind, here we are tonight with Mr. Richard Steele. Richard Steele grew up on the south side of Chicago. He dreamed of radio. Well, he made that dream a reality in 1970. He came to Chicago radio, and he has never left us since then, thank God. He has been on WVON, WBMX, WXFM, WGCI, WVAZ, WBEZ, and don't forget WJPC, owner of Johnson Publishing. So at any rate, let's get started with Richard Steele, please. What's up, Rich?
Not much. I had a hard time keeping a job, obviously, you know. Let me also add that one of the things I did was I was a pledge host on WTCW, Channel 11, for about 20 years. And so I think that's part of what allowed me to remain visible in Chicago.
Absolutely. I've seen you on those. Absolutely.
The doo-wop shows.
Yes. Yeah. But you have officially semi-retired. I don't know what that word semi-retired means, but what are you doing nowadays?
Well, you know, the deal was when COVID came along, it put the brakes on a lot of things for everybody. And I think within the last 18 months, I've started to do stuff again. I was doing a jazz show on the radio, University of Chicago, WHPK. And that stopped, and they were running tapes during, when COVID was going on. And when COVID eased up, they said we could come back in the studio. So that's what I do. I do jazz on Sundays, twice a month. I love jazz. I get to play what I want. I don't get paid, but it's okay because I love the music, right? And so I do that. I was on the board of SAG-AFTRA, which is the union that supports people in radio, television, and actors. And I've been on the board for 12, 13 years. But I'm not on the board now. I just recently left the board. I also am a member of, I'm on the board of CAP. I don't know if you've heard of CAP, but it's the Chicago Area Project. And what they do is training for Black and brown people in the community, jobs, job training, food assistance, education, a lot of things. A big organization. Their budget is like over $1 million, and so that's a real. It makes me feel really good to be part of that. So, and I MC occasional jazz shows. Like the Hyde Park Jazz Festival, which didn't do it the year before, but this past summer they did do it. So we were back, and I emceed that. I've been emceeing it for the whole 15 years. So that's kind of stuff I do, spend time with the grandkids. Yeah.
Okay. This podcast is called Black Muse. Who inspired you, Richard? Who made you want to be great in radio?
Well, way back in the day when I was really a kid, like a little kid, this is too far back for you, but portable radios were these boxes. They had a battery that was as big as a brick. And so I got one, I think, for Christmas, but I wasn't supposed to listen at night, so I put it under the covers and listened to the radio here in Chicago. And I heard people like, there was a guy named Sam Evans, Jam with Sam. He was on for a long time. But even before that, when I was living in Brooklyn, where I was born, my grandmother used to listen to soap operas. So I listened to soap operas with her, and I liked that a lot. Soap operas, I thought, for back in the day, that was good as TV. You know what I mean? So I'm talking about in the 40s, like in the early mid 40s. You know what I mean? So that was to me intriguing to hear people do what they did on the radio. That was like you're watching a play, but you didn't watch anything; you just listened to it. So I was fascinated with that. And then later on, what I really became incredibly fascinated with was hearing people on the radio doing their thing. I was living in New York. There was a station called WWRL, which was kind of like WVON was here in Chicago. And I listened to them. This is when I was going to radio school. And they had some incredible disc jockeys. And I was like, man, that's smoking. So they used to rock. And then at night, I listened to jazz. There was a guy named Symphony Sid who used to play jazz at night. I heard a lot of Miles Davis, and Sonny Rollins and Coltrane and all of that. And so I loved both, you know what I mean? But the guy was really smooth at night. Flashing back to Chicago a bit, when I was in high school, I used to listen to Sid McCoy. Sid McCoy had this smooth voice. He was so cool. And at one point, we lived next door to him. You know what I mean? So I was like, when I'd see him, I think I was in high school, and I'd see him leave his house, and he'd have a suit bag over his arm, like he was going out of town. He had a 1958 Chevy Impala. It was white, and it was cool. I said, the guy is cool on the radio, and he's got a cool car, you know what I mean? And he had a nice little family. He was married, he had 2 kids, 2 girls. And my brother and I remember always seeing him and, just kind of going, wow, that's Sid McCoy. And, later on, I mean, at some point too, I did listen to Herb Kent, who was an example for me in terms of Herb Kent and Sid McCoy had these smooth deliveries. You know what I mean? And I like that a lot. So that appealed to me. And I said, well, I really want to do that. And check this out, Clarence. There are very few people who ever do the thing that they say they're going to do in the high school yearbook. When they have your picture and they say, well, I'm going to grow up to be a, teacher. I'm going to be a pilot. Behind my name, I want to be a radio disc jockey. I have no idea why I said that. I mean, I because I've been exposed to radio, but in terms of having that as a goal, that's, if you look at I've still got my yearbook. And if I look at it today, it says that's what I want to be. And I'm like, really?
That's amazing.
Yeah,
Wow.
it is. Yeah. Yep. True story.
Ooh. Going back, any regrets at all, looking back on your long career in Chicago radio? Anything that you would do differently now, or any regrets at all?
Well, you know what, Clarence, sometimes I think to myself that if I had been more marketable, and don't get me wrong, I enjoyed the success I've had, and it's been good to me. But there are times when I thought, gee, if I had been more marketable, I could have made the kind of money that Tom Joyner made, and Doug Banks made. And then my wife quickly reminds me that there are very few people who have been in the business as long as you were, consistently, very seldom out of work, and you made more than the average working person makes. I said, that's true, you know what I mean? But so every time I get on that page, she helps me to get off that page, because it has been good. I made money. I mean, salary was good. And so I didn't get the kind of money they got, but there are some people who, listen, I know a lot of people who worked in small markets like Roanoke, Virginia, like I did, and they never got out of that cycle. I mean, they never got past, they may have worked in Atlanta, which is something that almost happened for me. But in terms of getting to a Chicago or New York or LA, come on, man, that's unbelievable, so I was blessed. I mean, and so in terms of doing anything differently, basically, no, but that part about the money, sometimes. Sometimes I get a feel for that,
You call your talks conversations versus interviews. What's the difference, and why do you do that?
Well, the bottom line to that, in terms of my approach, and something I learned from other people who did talk radio, was that, listening is very important. You can have a set of questions and things that you want to answer, or you want answers to. And then as you talk to the person, you can determine that they want to go in another direction. And so, unless you're doing a news interview, if you're doing a news interview, you want to stick to the topic. Politicians know that when you ask the question a second time, that's it. They didn't answer. They know the clock is ticking. And so because you got to move on to the next topic. But when you're just talking to people, generally speaking, in an interview with someone who is an actor or someone involved in the community or an author, you can take your time with that and listen carefully. And when they respond in a certain way, you can take it in that direction. So their answers are very important, and listening is very important. Let me tell you a quick story about Eartha Kitt. Eartha Kitt was a guest. I was working at WBEZ, and she came to Chicago to do a concert. So when she got to the radio station, this was a live interview, and I was worried if she'd get there on time because clock was ticking, and I said, "Ooh, she's not here yet." So when she got there, she terrified my producer. I mean, she was angry because the right people didn't pick her up at the airport, and something else didn't happen, and so he came in and told me, he said, "She's really pissed." He said, "I don't know what you're gonna do about that," but so he brought her in the studio, and we sat down, and then it seemed that everything I asked her before we went on the air, she had a problem with. She said, so I said, "Look, I know it's a great thing when you're performing outdoors." She was performing at some outdoor venue. She said, "I hate performing outdoors." I was, "Ooh, that was the wrong thing." And everything I asked her was the wrong thing, except, and I don't remember what the question was, but I hit on the right thing right before we went on the air. And we rolled from there. And she was cool. She was flirting and everything after that. So, sometimes you just get lucky. You know what I mean? I just kept hitting her with different things, hoping something would catch. This is before we went on the air, because we had like 5 minutes left before we went live. You know what I mean? So sometimes that happens. It was great.
So you never know. You got to sort of go with the flow.
You never know. You never know.
Now, Howard Washington was another one that you interviewed, that you had a conversation with. How was that? How were those conversations with the mayor of Chicago, Howard Washington?
Well, the deal with that is the radio station had hooked up a deal where I could talk. They used to have a sort of a press gangbang once a month with all the Black reporters at WGCI, and there was a round table, and everybody was there. Our general manager, I think it was Marv Dyson at the time, he said, "Listen, I'm going to try to set up a situation where it's just you talking to Harold." I said, "Oh yeah, well, that would be cool." So they set up a situation where once a month, Harold Washington would come into I had a talk show at night from 11 till 4 or 5 in the morning. So once a month, Mayor Washington would come in, and we'd take phone calls, and my producer really didn't screen the calls because Harold didn't want that. He wanted to be able to talk directly to the people. So when he and I talked about different things, I'd ask him questions about city business, and he was smooth. He's very forthcoming, but he knew the game. He was really good at it. And so I was always concerned that when people call in, they're going to try to trap him with a question or whatever. He was so smooth, like there was no question that he didn't ask or answer, rather, in a satisfactory manner. He was one of the best I've ever seen at that, and our conversations were excellent. I mean, I asked him about things that concerned the city, and he was so personable. It was Richard Steele, but he called me, "Well, Dick, blah, blah, blah." So he was a hell of a guy. He really was. He was incredible.
Yeah. Now, how about, there's such a long list: Otis Davis, Obama, Oprah, so many that you've interviewed, that you had conversations with, excuse me. Anything you can say about them?
Otis Davis was the most interesting person I ever interviewed. He was incredible. He was current. He knew about the past, and he gave the eulogy at Malcolm X's funeral. You know that.
Yes.
But he was so well-rounded, and he was straight up. I went to see him he was on a movie set here in Chicago. They were shooting a movie, and he agreed that I could come out and interview him in his trailer. And I sat down, and we had this interview, this conversation, and it was so great. As a matter of fact, at some point, another radio station, it was WVON at a later point. I did work there at one point, but this is when I was not working there. I was working at WBEZ, and they knew about the interview. So when Otis Davis passed away, they called me and asked me could they get a copy of that interview and run it? And so I asked BEZ, and they said, yeah. So it ran on WVO, and that rarely happens like that. But because it was Ossie Davis, and because the interview was just so, I mean, I really enjoyed it a lot. And, yeah, you're right. I interviewed a lot of people, Oprah, even Barack Obama before he became elected to anything, as a matter of fact. But Ossie Davis, that was the one. I interviewed Spike Lee, a lot of other people. But Ossie Davis, number one.
That's the man. Yeah, yeah. Now, you were asked one time to name 3 songs that would sum up your life. And I love your response to it. If you could share this with our viewers, 3 songs, because I couldn't think of how I would answer that question. But anyway, 3 songs that sums up the life of Richard Steele.
Well, the first one was by the Spaniels, a doo-wop group from way, way back in the 50s. And the song that I really picked out was called Peace of Mind. It was a slow ballad. And the reason, Clarence, I picked the song is because when I went to Hirsch High School, I sang with a doo-wop group, me, Richard Pegee, and 3 other guys, right? So I sang lead, not because I had a great voice, but my voice was in the same range as Pookie Hudson, who was the lead singer for the Spaniels. So when we sang that song in the auditorium, the girls would go, ooh, and I said, whoa, this is happening, because, get that kind of play from girls if you played on the football team or the basketball team, but that was in season. We were always in season, So that was my first big thrill. We did a lot of doo-wop shows, and I really enjoyed that a lot. So that's Peace of Mind was my first strong influence. Secondly, Miles Davis, the album Kind of Blue. 1959, I loved it like everybody else from the moment it came out. I mean, it was, I couldn't think of anything that was better than Miles. And, back in the day, you wouldn't remember this because you don't go back that far. But when you went to a young lady's house to visit, if you had an album under your arm, that you were considered very cool. And I had Miles under my arm, but a lot of cats were not actually listening to it. You just carried the album because it was cool. I was actually listening. And okay. So there's a tune on there called All Blues, and that was one of them. I like them all, but All Blues was my favorite off that Kind of Blue album, which, by the way, holds the record for the best-selling jazz album in history ever.
Whoa, I didn't know that. Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. So third one was Pharrell Williams, and this was kind of like, I guess, at the end when I was retiring from WBEZ, we had a big event, and I liked that song Happy. I really liked that song. You know what I mean? I don't know if you've ever seen the version on YouTube where it's the long version where they went to different countries and it's a real long version, like hours long. They went to countries all over the world and they had people lip sync into it. It's absolutely great. But that was my feeling I was happy about retiring, not, one of those things about, oh, I'm so glad to get out of here. It wasn't like that because I love BEZ and the people I worked with. I was happy about my whole career and about, the joy of having been in radio that long and, and I was still going to do some things, but I was just happy, so I had that played, as my celebration song during the party. I'm happy,
Cool. You received the Studs Turco Community Award a few years ago. That's a huge honor. How did it feel receiving it?
Honestly, I felt like I didn't deserve it. I mean, we did a special project at BEZ. I used to do these pieces where we'd do kind of a documentary, a radio documentary, and I've forgotten which one that was, but I had done a number of them. But I had a great producer, several producers working with me. So when I got the award, they had a big luncheon and all of that. I went and I accepted the award, but I really, because honestly, in my own mind, even based on what I said a minute ago as a talk show host, I never considered myself a journalist. And so, when I received that award, an award which journalists get, I felt that, I just got lucky because I had some people that I was working with and worked with me who were actually, real journalists. And I learned a lot from them in terms of my writing and some other things, but I felt like I wasn't really a journalist. I felt like Studs Terkel used to say that he wasn't a journalist, he was a recordist, because he used to record everybody and do these interviews. And that's how he came up with his books at different points in his career. So I really always felt inadequate in terms of that Studs Terkel thing. I just didn't feel like I was up to it. I did have an experience with Studs Terkel a couple of times, really. I interviewed him once when he had just gotten out of the hospital. I think he had heart surgery. And I couldn't believe how active he was, because they said, Studs just got out of the hospital. And I was interviewing him about his book. And he had done 3 interviews that day. He had more energy than me. and the other thing that stands out in my mind, Clarence, and I'll never forget this either, after 9/11, when 9/11 happened and the World Trade Center went down, and everybody had, it was an awful time. So Studs, he made the comment, he said he wanted to talk about it and do a commentary on it. So he knew me, and the producer I had, he knew her. So he asked if we would come to his house and sit down with a tape recorder and do an interview with him. So we did. What Studs Terkel said was, while he was certainly tremendously impacted, the impact it had on him about the 9/11 tragedy, the loss of lives and all of that. And he clearly made that point. But then he said, we have to look at what did we do to make people hate us like that? What is it? We need to sit down and really take a hard look at who we are. And man, and that's when I talked to him, I said, Stud, there's going to be a lot of negative reaction about that. That's going to be a really difficult thing for people to accept what you're saying. He said, yeah, I know, but that's how I feel about it. And I do think we really need to, take a look at ourselves and blah, blah, blah. I said, okay, well, I sat down and asked him some more questions, and we talked about it. And we recorded it, and they put it on the air at BEZ. And boy, did he get beat up by the local press. He's old, he's crazy, and he lost his mind, and blah, blah, blah. And he hadn't lost his mind. That's what he thought about it. We talked, and that's how he felt. But and he knew he was going to get beat up, but he said he had to be honest in terms of what his own thinking was, and so that's what he did. But I'll never forget that, because in terms of being a journalist, even though he said he felt like he really wasn't a journalist, but he was, and sticking to his guns. Somebody who, this is what I believe, and Studs had a lot of credibility in the journalism world, and so he kind of took a big chance. But at that point, Studs was like 80, I think, because I think he lived to be 91, and so it was a real lesson for me in terms of making a commitment in terms of your thinking and sticking to it, and I'll always remember that. Studs Terkel.
Yes, indeed. How would you like to be remembered, Richard? I mean, you've given so much to the city of Chicago. I mean, we just discussed great things, but how would you like to be remembered?
Clarence, it's very simple. This is, for me, it's not rocket science. And I heard, I must admit that I heard somebody else say this, but I really love what he said. This was an interview I saw with Sidney Poitier. And he was asked that very same question. And he simply said, I'd like to be remembered as a nice guy.
Boom.
That's it. That's it.
Yeah.
Not complicated, none of that. It was just, I'd like to be remembered as a nice guy. And that's the size of it. I mean? I don't have any profound things to say about that. Life has been good to me. I've had a lot of great experiences, and I've got family at this point, and I've got a brother who I'm pretty tight with, and so he's a principal, a retired principal of a grammar school. I'll just say this may not be for the interview necessarily, unless you wanted to, but my mother had a hard time believing that I could have a career in radio. She used to think that that's something that people do on the side. That's not like a real job kind of thing. And so it was years before at some point she said, wow, because people used to say to her, Richard Steele's your son? Oh, wow, you know what I mean? That kind of thing. So, at that point, she began to have some different thoughts on that. But my mother's position was that if you didn't go and get a college degree, then you need to do that in order to make it in life. And I didn't do that. And so, but my brother, he filled the gap. He went back to school. He got a degree, then he got a master's, then he got a doctorate in education, so he became a principal. So, so in my family, that was a good thing. So, I don't, life has been okay. I mean, I just try to be a good guy, do the best I can, be fair, treat people fairly, and, not tell a lot of lies. So, what I've been doing lately, and this is just because I'm getting older. I just turned 80 years old. And I did a little bit of this before, but I do more of it now. When I see people panhandling outside Walgreens or Dunkin' Donuts, most of the time I put something in their pocket. You know what I mean? It's $5 or $10 or whatever, because I can do that. And I don't do it for them to think, well, yeah, that's a great guy. No, I just do it because I think had life gone in a different direction, that could be me.
All right. Well, thank you very much for this conversation. Thank you very much, Richard. I really appreciate this.